Hi everyone. Tonight I'm going to talk about Gatsby.js. But first, hi, I'm Alex. Nice to meet you. I'm a software engineer and independent contractor. You can find me online as Bobilito, B-O-B-Y-L-I-T-O, it's written here. And professionally, you can reach out at alex@neumann.xyz. And I love JavaScript. But also, I need to make a confession. I'm a static website generator addict. Over the last 8 years, I've built many projects with static website generators. I started with Jekyll, and most notably, I've abused static website generators in order to build documentation, and I even made a talk about it where I explain how I put JSDoc into different static website generators. But it is not the topic of the talk right now. Actually, I want in this talk to answer two questions. How is Gatsby different from other static website generators? And is Gatsby right for you or your next project? Or at least help answer the last question. First, in order to make comparisons correctly, I'll introduce a baseline of what is a static website generator. So a static website generator is a tool that transforms light markup into HTML. It takes a bunch of markdown files, for example, transform them into HTML for production. Actually, it doesn't do that It doesn't only do that for the markdown files, it also has the help of templates. So a bunch of markdown files are then transformed into raw HTML, which are then shelled into a template, and that ends up in an HTML file. Those HTML files, you can put them online in a CDN, which make them very, very handy. The static website generators come in different sizes and shapes. Some are very opinionated, such as Jekyll, which are like a unique, you have a unique way of doing things using Markdown and liquid templates. Others, like Metalsmith, are more like a la carte, where you can have different plugins for different kinds of markup in order for you to make your full stack of a static website generator. And those static website generators, they share common properties. They are pipelines, which means they execute tasks one after the other. The content is the main concern. The templating comes second. And the content will most likely come from files, even though that's not completely true, but that's the spirit in the beginning. So what about Gatsby.js? How is it different? And first, let's talk about templates. Why? Because this is the first thing that you will encounter while creating a new Gatsby project. Actually, this is the folder of a new Gatsby project. And as you can see, the pages are a few JS files. Interestingly, those are React components. And at first, well, at least personally, it was a bit odd for having that the templates were React components. Why is that? Because usually we're more used to a classic backend templating system, such as Pug or Mustache or stuff like that. And when you have React, actually it's not that bad of an idea. Why? Because one thing that is great if you use a front-end technology for doing templating, it's because it can be used in the backend, which is more like the build time, and in the front-end, which is very handy when you are working on a web application, because then you have like no duplication of templates in different languages. And hence, it removes the risk of errors of having different kind of markup. Also, you work with the same mindset. It means that at runtime, which means that in the browser it executes the same, the code executed in the browser will be the same that the one executed in build time, which means that you don't have a different kind of mindset to apply for each one of those steps. Let's talk about content. So far, we've only talked about templates, right? And we need to have access to some content. You don't want to hard code the whole content of your website into your React components. And this is a great thing that in Gatsby, this is implemented through source plugins. You have a data source on one end and a GraphQL API on the other. And the source plugin will make the data available through GraphQL. Okay, so yet again, it's a technology that is not really like obvious for this kind of setup, but actually it's very, very powerful because GraphQL is a query language. So if you forget about the hype, you have a query language, so you have a declarative way of accessing your data, which is, well, obvious for accessing data. And so this is an example. It's not that complex. You have MDX is a root node that is exposed by the MDX plugin. You make a filter in order to search for a specific MDX content, and we retrieve only the ID and the title. One thing that is great about that is that it's source agnostic. It doesn't care about whether it's Markdown or any kind of file. It could be Markdown, MDX, but it could be also from another source completely. It could be in the cloud, if you use like a headless CMS, such as Prismic or Contentful. And also could be, and it's a very interesting use case, a database. So you could access directly your data from a database. Funny enough, you can also access JavaScript documentation through a plugin like that, which could have been very helpful for me back in the days. One thing that I find very interesting in Gatsby is that assets are also content. So it means that you can also access it through the API that is offered by GraphQL. And because of that, they can offer a lot of behind the scene and hide a lot of complexity behind the scene. For example, in the image plugin, it does a lot of optimization for you. Example, here you have a PNG full resolution. Well, in the old way of doing things, either you optimize it yourself or you just put it on your website and you have like a megabyte big image on your website. Well, you don't really want that, so the plugin will just compress it, add good parameters to have a good quality enough, and you come from megabytes to kilobytes. But it can go even further, and this is where it's more applicable for GraphQL, because instead of just making just one full resolution optimize, which could be either too big for mobile or too small for desktop, it can actually generate all the different sizes automatically for you, and you don't have to do anything. Of course, you could do that with other tools, but because it's in GraphQL, you can hide the data structure that goes with the whole configuration of that and pass it to the components. It's pretty powerful, and you don't have, and then you use src set for free directly. Okay, so we talk about templates, right? Templates, so you can generate pages, and we saw how you could access the content. But in a static website generator, I usually have a lot of Markdown files and light markup files, and those files, I want them directly generated. For example, in a blog, you have like one file usually for one page, output page. And so Gatsby also has a very interesting solution for that. It's Create Pages API. It comes into two parts. One part is the extension point, Create Pages. Okay, what is an extension point? It's not something mystery. It's actually a step in the build where it is okay for you to create pages. Sorry. What does it mean that it's okay for you to create pages? It means that at this step, you know that the GraphQL will be completely set up for you to access your data. Because you can access your data, you can then use the function createPage, which will allow you to create the page dynamically. So this is an example of an implementation of createPages. On the top, you have the GraphQL that will get all the markdown files that I need to create my pages. And afterwards, for each of those nodes, I will actually create a new page. You don't need to understand the details, but that's the idea. You get your data, you get all your files that are necessary, and then you iterate over them, and you create the pages. So, if we bring everything together, we have on one hand the data source, which can be anything. Then you have the source plugins that you configure for each one of those data sources. Those plugins will then feed the data graph, which will be read either by React components directly, like hard-coded, or you can dynamically create new pages, which will use a component which could then use the data graph again. So, okay, I have a background in API and API thinking, and so I think it's very interesting that Gatsby actually came from templates and ended up with this new API. Usually, in the static website model, you have really you have one way of doing things, and here you really break that kind of model and make it more flexible and more powerful. Because you can have multiple pages for a single file, or the other way around, have many files that you concatenate and many data sources that you can use to bring into a single HTML page. So, is Gatsby right for your next project? Well, actually, it depends. It will depend on your project, of course. So I will try to give you some pros and cons. So why not choose Gatsby.js? Well, Gatsby.js may be daunting and complex because of its ecosystem. It comes from React. You have some complex debate over what to do with CSS. And if you don't know the stuff, you might be a bit lost. You can learn them, but maybe complex. Also, you have the choices of where do you get the source of data and stuff like that. A lot of choices, and choices takes time and thinking power. Also, there is quite a bit of magic. So some could say that it's DX, so it's developer experience. Others might say, hey, okay, it's too magic and I don't understand what's going on. That's true. It can feel like that. And also, if you have mastered something else, I mean, please do create something rather than learning something. Even though it's cool to learn something, don't go for it just for the sake of learning. I think it's good to just build stuff. 5 reasons not to choose Gatsby.js or to choose Gatsby.js. X, Y, Z are using it, so I should use it. Not a good opinion. Otherwise, yeah, I don't like the tech, React, it's complex, whatever. Yeah, well, it's pretty easy React, so there's no really complexity. Or I don't like GraphQL, again. It's pretty simple. It's not doing super complex stuff. Well, it's up to you, but really, but why choose Gatsby.js? Well, It has all the best practices built in, like we saw image optimization, but they also did a lot of job trying to get the time to first render, first paint, optimized as much as possible. So it's really like built in the framework, and you don't have to implement that. So really, when you start a new project, instead of waiting months to make sure that your project is going to be a hit, you have it by default, which I think is a good case. Well, it's good also if you're building a web app. If you're building a web app and you're using React, because if you're not using React, it might not be the case. If you're using React and you want to build a web app, it's great because you have this sort of server-side rendering already done with all the best practices, and you can also still have the dynamicity of having a React app, basically. It's super well documented. I mean, I'm super impressed. The Gatsby team did an awesome job, and I used to work at companies that do a lot of documentation, and I can tell you that they're doing the job very well. You're not left alone, never. They have tutorials for everything. It's really impressive. And the community, I mean, they have lots of plugins to plug anything that you want. And if you don't, there are people willing to help. So it's really like at least a great project to get started with. And voila! Thanks for listening to me. You can find me on Twitter, Bobilito. And if you're looking for a freelancer, you can reach out by email. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for some questions.
Yep. No questions. I'm a no question presenter. No. Yeah. Maybe we can have a microphone. I don't know if we want it to be recorded. I think it's going to be best.
Hi, thanks for the talk.
Thank you.
If I already have a React application, how can I use Gatsby in my existing application, or can I use some primitive like MDs used in Gatsby? So some content management.
Yeah. Right off the bat, I would say no, because it's really like a full configuration of it's embedding Webpack and everything. So everything is packaged in. I don't think you can extract the sort of content management GraphQL thing, but that would be a good question. They have also components like the image responsive thing, and I don't know if you could use it. I think the data structure is complex, so you could not, and it's not very well documented, so I don't think that you could use. So yeah, no, I don't think you can come and pick elements of Gatsby, even though it could be a great and interesting topic to figure out.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
So how's the performance of Gatsby? Because with Jekyll it can get quite slow for regenerating pages and so on.
It says it's pretty fast. I mean, I haven't done any benchmarks. It will depend on the number of things that you do at your build time, obviously. If you have lots of pages, then it will get slower and slower. However, they also document ways to bypass this kind of thing. So they don't suggest you to generate everything, but you could like load some things, some pieces of content.
Any other question?
Thanks for the talk.
Thank you.
How does updating your website work with the system?
Good question. So updating your websites is basically rebuilding your websites. And so usually you would use a CI or something like Netlify that would take your website and regenerate everything all the time. So yeah, not the best optimized way of using resources, but yeah.
Any last question?
I have a question. Is that make sense to use Gatsby for example, single page like landing page? Because if you have many separate pages, like about me or frequent asked questions, it's obvious. But for single page, like landing page, is this good solution because of, for example, this image optimization or other benefits?
I guess I think if you already know Gatsby, the cost of just launching it, using a starter, get your plugins that you know is not that much. So and you get the benefits as you said. However, if you're just learning for the sake of it and you want really this specific page, maybe not. I think if you already know another tool, and you have like a very limited scope, which is like a single page, and you have like images that you already know and assets that have a limited number of them. I think it doesn't make sense to launch Gatsby.
If I, for example, combine some static code and, for example, dynamic.
And then
when I, for example, want to include some contact form. And this will be dynamic in React with some validation or something. And I don't want to write it in jQuery and only in React.
Yeah, use Gatsby. I mean, it's pretty easy to get started with. So yeah, I mean, yeah, why not? It's a good use case. Well, it's not a bad use case, I would say.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I think we can have maybe the last question.
Thanks for your talk. Do you have to use a service like Netlify, or can you just build it locally and deploy the static portion of it once it's built?
Yes, you can do that completely. Actually, that's what I'm doing. I'm using Netlify, not in an automated way, but in a as you push way. So I build locally and then I push. It works correctly, no problem.
All right. So feel free to ask more questions during the drinks, and I think we're going to move on to the next talk. Thank you,
Thank you, everyone.